who came home from America, those who only went over to see the time. And such a man was Mick the Fiddler. Mick said that the climate over New York didn't agree with him. He got a crick in his neck from looking up at the tall buildings. The day before Mick the Fiddler set out for America, he helped his brother and his brother's wife, Moll Phil, to set the barley in the high field. And Mick the Fiddler was home again in time to cut it. It was his brother that went to the railway station to meet him. And when Mick the Fiddler got off the sidecar above the gable of his own house, he looked around at the countryside and said, "So this is Ireland." Well, the devil sweep him, and he only gone 6 months. He had a crease in his trousers that would shave a gooseberry for you. And the tie he had around his neck, I wouldn't like any bull to see it. He didn't know any one of all the people that came to meet him, even though they weren't the same book as him going to school. He went straight into the kitchen, and very taken aback, by the way, at what he saw sitting up near the hob of the fire, he said to the brother's wife, Moll Phil, he said, "Say, Moll," he said, "what's this long-tailed bugger in the corner?" And she said, "Mick," she said, "is it how you don't even know the cat?" But of all the people to come back from America, Mick the Fiddler gave the best value, for he answered all questions appertaining to the nature of New York. And signs by the house used to be full every night, and the brother and the brother's wife, Moll Phil, pusses on them, for they used to get into bed until all hours. And another thing, Moll Phil, she was very house proud. Oh, the kitchen was shining. You could see yourself in the delf and the dresser. You could eat off the floor. And it killed her down dead to see all of us trooping in every night and bringing in the mud of the locality in our shoes. Well, Mick's first night back, he was talking about the boat going out to America. And he said, we must have saved the company a fortune on food, he said, because it was 4 days before we could keep anything down. At that time, all those immigrant boats used to call into Ellis Island in New York Harbor, where those immigrants had been subjected to a very strict medical examination. Mick said that you'd be prodded and poked the same as if you were a bullock at the fair. And the way the doctor, the way he'd go through the hair of your head and look under your fingernails, Mick said you wouldn't be one bit surprised if he looked up a certain place to see was your backbone straight. All the clothes had to be taken off, every stitch, even the socks, and put into a little closet, and then you had to go in naked to the doctor. And when Mick was going in naked to the doctor, he met one of the cases of Tourneau running out against him and saying, "Where's my trousers? Where's my trousers?" 'Tis a lady doctor that's inside. Mick's first job over was drawing water in a big barrel in a 4-horse car for baptizing small babies. At this time, the population of New York was going up by leaps and bounds. And Mick said in the chapel where he was working that there were 4 curates there all day with their sleeves folded up to their elbows, and they're baptizing away and the water flowing out the front door. And he said that, like here, all babies were baptized in the chapel, he said, but wakes were held in a funeral parlour. And Mick was at one of these, and he said, the man was laid out inside in a coffin with the lid off, and he dressed up in a new suit, same as if he'd be going to a dance, no habit. And Mick thought it was a pity, you know, to be burying him in the good suit. So he was called aside, and he was told that there was no back to the suit. I can tell you, says Mick, that the Yanks would teach you how to live. And I'll never forget, we were this night, the house was full, and Mick was on to his favourite subject, skyscrapers. And there was a man there that night, he had been in an excursion to Cork, and he said, I suppose, Michael, he said that all those skyscrapers in New York, they'd be nearly as tall as one of the spires of St. Finbarr's Cathedral in Cork. Well, Mick looked at him. God help your head, says Mick. They'd go down that far in New York before they'd ever think of going up. And those buildings go up so high, they had to take a brick off one chimney to let the moon pass. And they go up so quick. I was one morning, Mick said I was going to work, and they were digging out the foundations for a high-rise apartment. And when I was coming home from work that evening, the tenants were being evicted for non-payment of rent. Well, they all wanted now to know about the topography of New York, and Mick was going to draw a map, and of course there was no sheet of paper big enough in the house. So what did he do? Thunder and turf, only take out the ashes from under the fire and put a fine coating of the ashes like that on the flag of the fire. And then with the top of old Din Donovan's walking cane, he drew for us the outline of the island of Manhattan in the ashes. He said that it was 10 miles long and 3 miles wide, bought by the Dutch from the Red Indians for less than $50. Don't you think, says Mick, there were bargains going in those days? And then with the top of the walking cane, he drew the avenues running north and south. And then he drew the streets running east and west as straight as a die. And Mick said the buildings between two streets, that was known as a block. And that there were 8 blocks to the mile, if you could believe him. And then he began to call out the names of all the places. Now, these were as well known to us as the townlands inside in our old parish, from hearing them mentioned in the letters home. And he showed us Chinatown, and he showed us the Bowery, and he said that there was a Kinmare Street in Chinatown. Weren't they cut short for names? And then he showed us Riverside Drive and Columbus Circle and Central Park West. And there was a man there, and looking down at the map, he said to Mick, he said, I wonder, he said, where is my sister now? He said, in the middle of all that ashes. And Mick said, do you know her number? I do, he said, to the 125 West 84th Street. Oh, says Mick, she'll be up here, he said, between Amsterdam and Broadway. That's where she hang out. That could be true, says Mick, for she works in a laundry. Well, we were putting our caps into our mouths to stop the laughing. And the cat that was sitting up there in the hob, you know, he got up and arched his back and opened his mouth, and you'd swear that the cat was laughing too. And the dog that was lying here by the fire, well, that poor old dog, he didn't know it. Half of him was inside in the Hudson River. And the dog, you see, he was asleep, and he had his snout that way down between his 2 paws, and he was backing in his sleep. Woof, 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 woof. And you know, isn't it lovely to hear a dog backing in his sleep like that? Whatever little images are in his mind. Maybe he thinks that he's after sheep in the mountain, or mixed up in some other carry-on. And then the dog, he took a deep breath, filled up his lungs. You could nearly count his ribs. And he held in the breath, and then all of a sudden, he let it out like that, and demolished 3/4 of an acre of skyscrapers. And you could see the little particles of dust rising up between you and the light of the lamp, and you could see Moll Phil's face, and it was like the map of South America. And there were Breshnans there that night, their brothers in the Bronx. And there were Sheehans there, they had sisters in Staten Island. There were Kyo's there, they had brothers in Brooklyn. Don't mind those that had relations in Yonkers and the Jersey Shore. And all of these now, they wanted to know where were their relations in America. And Mick said that all these places that were named, that they were outside of the island of Manhattan, up the Hudson and down the bay, turn to Coney and Rockaway. And to show all these extra places, the chairs had to be pulled back and more ashes brought out. And in the middle of all this caper, what did the cat do? Only hop off the box and marched up 5th Avenue. You'd think it was Patrick's Day. And the dog, we began to call the cat because she'd be carrying the ashes in her pads all over the house, and we were saying, pussy, pussy, pussy. And then the dog, hearing us calling the cat, you know, thinking he was being left out or something, the dog got up, walked over, and sat down in the middle of the Bronx. Began to wag his tail. Now the ashes was rising, and now you could see the look on Moll Phil's face. And Mick the fiddler knew that the fat was in the fire, and he began to call the dog over to the Bronx. And he says, nice dog, he says. And the dog, you know, a big, you know, friendly, half fool of a sheepdog. The more Mick spoke to him, the friendlier he got. And the friendlier he got, the more his tail went around like a propeller. And he began to churn up the ashes until you couldn't see your finger in front of your face. And out of this thick fog came all filled with the sweeping brush. And as I was the nearest one to her, I got the first crack of it. Says she, I'll give you the Bronx, and I'll give you Chinatown. The same as if she was the mounted police, she cleared the kitchen. We all spilled out the front door like dirty water out of a bucket, bringing to an abrupt ending Mick the Fiddler's graphic description of the island of Manhattan in the state of New York and the continent of America. They went the low road, I came the high road. They crossed by the stepping stones, I came over the bridge. They were drowned, and I was saved. And all I ever got out of my storytelling was shoes of brown paper and stockings of thick milk. I only know what I heard. I only heard what was said, and a lot of what was said was lies.